Hey, have you been ordering stuff offline?
No, I haven't. And you know what else?
What? This ain't even a bathroom.
Hello one, hello all, it's the most gothiest ghost of them all, Caspa in the flesh, and it's time for a review of Cindy Lee, Diamond Jubilee. Cindy Lee is a hypnagogic pop project fronted by Patrick Flegel, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, formerly of the band Women, which I was definitely a fan of, still am to this day, and unfortunately the band met their end actually at a show, infamously mind you, and went on to work with Mike Wallace and Scott Monroe to form Viet Cong, which would become Preoccupations, which I've also been a fan of. Now, taking on this project here, and I mean reviewing wise, I was a little shaky on it due to the fact that I felt the Cindy Lee project wasn't exactly up to snuff in their back catalog, so I was very hesitant to review it. Not only that I haven't really been a huge fan of the Cindy Lee project, but also due to the fact that this thing is over 2 hours long and not available on regular streaming, but I gave it a listen and gave it a listen again and again and again, and it just clicked with me and I ended up loving it. And there's moments on here that remind me of bands that I love, like Velvet Underground, which also I found influence on from the Public Strain album, and even Flaming Lips. In terms of genres, if I could pin this in a genre, obviously it would be lo-fi hypnagogic pop, but it's a very rustic, dirty display of it, which makes for some very psychedelic moments. It's colorful, but it's still hazy. This thing is like being transported to a David Lynch movie, but it's the VHS version, where it has its glossiness, but the distortion with the bass and the mix just gives it a very grainy feeling, and I absolutely love that. I think it gives the album a lot of personality. I think it gives the album a lot of character, like on the opener, which is also the title track. And they also give us like these dreamy moments or these cinematic moments, like on Baby Blue, that gives a very alluring vintage diner scene vibe. In the midst of this distortion, there's beauty shining through the graininess here, which I feel Diamond Jubilee does do this album justice as a title, but also I feel as a theme, because you're getting a lot of this glimmering, shimmering instrumentation, but the Jubilee part I'm kind of stuck on, because to me, I feel this is like the diamond in the rough type thing. I just love how the shimmering and the glimmering adds a contrast to the dirty, twangy production. Also, the vocals are definitely various here. They could either go from these low-pitched, soulful croons to these feminine, low falsetto vocals. And yeah, I said low falsettos. And Dreams of You, although these tracks are lo-fi, it does not take away from the pop sensibility that this album has. Not one bit. Now, when I say pop, I'm talking about like the vintage style pop. I'm not talking about what you would get on the radio that has this really clean, this really sanitized sound. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about pop in the sensibility of it being catchy, but also they mix this catchiness with this grittiness, with this dirt, with this grime. But through the grime, again, you get like a lot of color, you get a lot of exuberance, and a lot of groove too. Like, this thing does not skim on the grooves, and definitely has a knack for melody and guitar playing, serving up different sonic elements. And they always find ways to keep these tracks very intoxicating and attention-grabbing. Like on All I Want Is You, that has this dreamy set of strings. Like on All I Want Is You, that has this dreamy set of vocals. that just hits you with these instantaneous psych arpeggios. And it's absolutely mesmerizing. Or like on Always Dreaming, with this versatile instrumentation, touching writing. And I love how there's something otherworldly or ghostly about the vocals. And the song Dallas, I believe where the strums are very watery, the vocals are reverbed, but it feels necessary. It feels like this isn't a put-on aesthetic. This isn't to mask any flaws that this album has. This is more to create atmosphere. And these tracks can also be danceable, like on Kingdom Come, which is bright and majestic. And the lyrics are uplifting even in the context of grim circumstance, which is also the case on Stone Faces. What do I see? Stone faces looking back at me. Which has these classic soulful strums that, dare I say, sound very old school psych R&B, like something off the Temptations Psychedelic era, or the Shy Lights, and have a very vibrant groove to them. But again, the lyrics are depicting these tombstones staring at Cindy's direction. It's kind of like a death around the corner type thing, and death is like taunting them. But even in conceptual grim moments, this album does not shy away from its very energetic pop appeal without it sounding too saccharine. Flesh and Blood has this echoed pumping bass, heavenly synths, enchanting and glimmering soloing, but still has a very fuzzy quality to it. If I could point out where the influence is coming from, as I alluded to earlier, it would definitely be Velvet Underground or Lou Reed. And the group vocals are gorgeous. And I love the way the momentum picks up as the track goes on into this dreamy, fuzzed out passage. And I will say, I feel there is an impetus to sequence in this album, because sequentially, this album does start off bright, but then as the album progresses, you do notice there is a darker presence to the instrumentation, whether sonically or conceptually. So there is definitely a nocturnal quality to the tracks as the album progresses, mostly due to how really bassy this gets. This thing does not skim on the bass whatsoever. And also, as I alluded to earlier, there is variation with genres here. Like, there's an all-out synth pop song on this thing, but the grimy quality keeps this album focused. Like on the lo-fi synth banger Gayblevision, that sounds like a grimy version of Depeche Mode, Soft Cell, OMD, teaming up with a Vibio sound machine, and they all got sucked into this lo-fi VHS nightmare banger that has a great futuristic chord progression with swelling danceable bass with disco Afrobeat style. This is pretty post-punk, which, as you've known if you've watched this channel for so long, and if not, hey, I do love me some post-punk. It's in my DNA. And even though this genre is a step outside of what's been served here, the lo-fi mixing still works within the context and the focus of this album. We also get another stylistic change on the very psychedelic, probably the most psychedelic and funky track on the album, Dracula, that has these groovy rhythms, bass, and these wah-wahs, with some nice weepy guitar lines and blissful synths. There's also Lockstepp, which is actually the most dreariest track here, which has these really gloomy strings, but they're mixed in such an opaque, cavernous way, followed up with these disjointed bassy guitars that sound so fragmented as they continue with an extra helping of more Afrobeat. Also, these tracks could get noisy too. If You Hear Me Crying has a sweet, sunny melody with these brittle guitar lines, and these tracks could get noisy at points too, which also draws me back to Women in a way that sounds like something from a Women record, but not a leftover from Women, which shows they're not afraid to bring chaos with the sweetness. Like on the track If You Hear Me Crying, that has a sweet sunny melody, but bam, hits you with that feedback, that distorted, shrill feedback. An absolutely blaring guitar solo. It's so sunny, it's so bright, and when people say bright, it's like, how can music be bright? And it's more in terms of volume and fidelity. And don't tell me I'm wrong, it's probably the most hauntingly beautiful song on this album. And I know, like, you want me to go over every track here, and the best way I could sum this up without making this video as long as the album is, which is over 2 hours, it would be impossible. But overall, it's clear that I do love this album. It's pop, but it's not cleanly produced. But I feel this is a pop album, if you are a pop fan, you should listen to, if you're not too stuck in your radio pop bubble. So if you can get out of that bubble and come into this otherworldly David Lynch-like experience, I feel you could get enjoyment out of this album, especially if like you're an old head. You could definitely get enjoyment from this album because it does pull from vintage eras. But here's the thing. This sounds like a old school pop album, but it's not running with the fact it's merely pulling from the psychedelic era. No. To me, I feel this is a very creative approach with it, especially with how various it is. And it does bring nostalgia. But also, it's very entrancing. It's very gorgeous. Haunting and moving and very beautiful at the same time, with gorgeous melodies, great songwriting, curveballs and stylistic variations, which makes for the best hypnagogic lo-fi album I've probably heard in a decade. There are tracks here I do feel were kind of out of step with the melody just a bit, notably on To Heal This Wounded Heart, but other than that, man, I'm feeling a 4 out of 5 on this album. Great album. If you've heard this, what did you think of this? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? Caspa, Gothic Ghost, Cindy Lee, Diamond Jubilee. Till we meet again.